Avatar: The Way of Water is directed by James Cameron and stars Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana, and Sigourney Weaver. Jake Sully lives with his newfound family on the moon of Pandora, but when a familiar threat returns to finish what was previously started, Jake must work with his family and the sea tribes of the Na'vi to protect their home. I remember seeing the original Avatar when I was a wee lad in 2009, and I remember liking it, and all of these years later, I still like it. Don't get me wrong, I love the effects, I love the visuals, I love the score, I love everything virtually about it, but when it comes to the story and the characters and the writing, I didn't think they lived up to everything that was visually set before us. So when the trailers for Avatar: The Way of Water were released, I had moderate expectations for it because more or less, I was expecting pretty much the exact same thing as the first movie. Visually, everything would be amazing. Story-wise, it would be lacking. And more or less, I got exactly that. Don't get me wrong, I still really like this movie, but it's not flawless. Okay, so let's just start off all the positives with the most umbrella thing that you all know is the best part of this movie, the visuals. Everything about the way this movie looks is spec-goddamn-tacular. The CGI is on a completely other level in this film. Everything looks so real, from the people to the animals to the planets to the environment. Everything has such a realistic looking texture. In the original Avatar film, I wanted to go to Pandora. In this film, I feel like I could live in Pandora. It looks that real. Half of the time when I was watching all of this happening, no, scratch that. 90% of the time when I was watching this movie, it completely glossed over my mind that everything that I was watching wasn't real. It was all fake and it was all CGI. That's how good this movie looks. I completely forgot computer-generated effects were used. The way that the water moves and looks, the different textures of the characters when they're dry as compared to when they're all wet, which, yeah, I know that sounds obvious thing, but at the same time, you don't know how hard that is to replicate with computers. And the fact that in this movie, they did it so realistically, even though when I'm 90% sure there was no water used during these scenes, it's incredible. It's mind-blowing. And the Na'vi and even the most subtle of texture upgrades from the first movie, especially the eyes. The eyes, I definitely noticed. Well, scratch that. I didn't notice it. My friend next to me noticed it. How with the avatars and the Na'vi in this film, their eyes never just stayed the same place when they were looking at something, because human eyes don't act like that. They are always scanning up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. And they do that in this film in a way that's not distracting, but in a way that is natural. And on top of just how gorgeous all of the CGI looks in this film, the cinematography is outstanding. We move from the forests to the Sea of Pandora, and even though a lot of the cinematography in the first film was incredible, it's nothing compared to just how gorgeously blue everything in this movie is. It looks so crisp and bright and sunny, and just a complete and utter color difference from the forests of this world. And from a world building standpoint, just like the first film, Way of Water nails it. Learning everything about the Forest Na'vi in the first film was already interesting, and instead of giving us more or less the same as the Forest Na'vi for the sea guys, the sea tribes actually have more or less a completely different culture, a completely different look that still harkens back to a lot of the overall philosophies of the forest tribes. Even visually, the sea tribe people look different. Their skin tones are much brighter, their tails are much bigger and thicker, and their arms are much more muscular, just so that they can swim through water much faster than the forest tribes could. And on top of that, the score for this movie was was so good. They use a lot of the same overall scores from the first film, but not only is a lot of it revamped in this film, but they also add a lot of new stuff that I really did enjoy and really did add that otherworldly euphoric feeling that the first film had. If you are just going into The Way of Water simply to look at it and sometimes pay attention when it starts to talk about the philosophies and the culture, you are going to love this movie so much. As for everyone else, I don't know. Alright, so let's start off with the bad stuff by getting the characters out of the way. The characters in this movie aren't awful, they just have more or less, no real personality. Neytiri, Jake, their kids, more or less don't have any personality separating them outside of the typical family archetypes that they are. And where the villains of this movie are concerned, I don't know. I'll give them half an up and half a down because the Marines in this movie are actually kind of interesting in the way that they become avatars and how different they interact with the environment as opposed to when Jake Sully was first interacting with the environment in the first film. But the human villains are just as cartoonishly generic as the first, to the point where their motivation is pretty much just copy and paste the exact same motivation as the first film, just a slightly different environment with slightly different characters. The story was also pretty flimsy for me. In the first third of the movie, there's definitely a story that's going on, but in the second third, in the middle of this movie, the story for the most part just sort of drops off, and instead of going through a story, we're just looking at the sea tribes themselves. And while, again, I'm pretty sure that's what most people who go to Way of Water are there to see, for me, I would have liked a more concrete story that also did explore this new environment. And as for the last third of this movie, well, I'll give credit to Way of Water for one thing. Whereas the first movie was more or less just ripping off like Fern Gully and Dancing with Wolves throughout the entire film, in this movie, they pretty much just saved the ripoff until the last third. To the point where in the theater, I just leaned over to my friend and whispered in his ear, Mr. Cameron, your Titanic is showing. And on top of the overall bland story and characters, there are plot holes sprinkled all throughout the movie, but once the film tries to wrap up, the plot holes and the Deus Ex Machinas really do become more apparent. Overall, what I'm saying is this movie did not need to be 3 hours long, in my opinion. I feel like a good 20 minutes of filler could have been cut from the film, because a lot of times, especially in the middle portion of the film, it does sort of repeat plot points multiple times throughout that hour-long interval. And I feel like if they cut like half of that out, the movie would have been a much more tight, compact story that got out what it needed to in a good amount of time with good amount of pacing. But I won't lie, I'm probably being more harsh than I mean to, because overall, I really did love this movie. Just like the first film, the world building is interesting, the score is otherworldly, the cinematography is gorgeous, and the effects are on a level of its own in this movie. But just like the first film, the characters are bland, the story is flimsy, there are Deus Ex Machina and plot holes throughout, and the movie is definitely longer than it needed to be. If you love the first Avatar, you're gonna love this movie. If you hate the first Avatar, you're gonna hate this movie. And if you just thought the first Avatar was okay, you're gonna think that this movie is equally okay. I'm going to give Avatar: The Way of Water an A. Well guys, thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments down below, which do you like better, the original Avatar or Avatar: The Way of Water? For me, I might like Avatar: The Way of Water a bit more because I thought the dynamic with the villains were a bit more interesting, but overall, I think they're pretty much on the same level of good. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are the best. And don't forget to click subscribe and click the bell icon down below to stay up to date on all things movie, all things TV, all things nerd.